Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to talk about inflation in Nigeria and its impact on everyone, right? From consumers to business owners to the economy. But in this video, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about inflation, break it down for you and how inflation affects your personal finances. I want to leave out the businesses, the economy, in general in today's video. I just want to talk about, its impact on individuals, consumers like, you and me, and the strategies you can actually put in place in an inflationary, environment. So if you stick around, you're going to find out some of the strategies I want to propose to you on how to manage your personal finances as inflation in the country is increasing. But before we start, I want to first show you some news reports that kind of summarize the current inflationary problems we have in Nigeria. The cost of that, how it started, right from the announcement of subsidy is gone by the president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And after that video, then we're going to talk about, the strategies I want to propose to you. So stick around, but let's see this video first.
Nigeria's annual inflation rose to its highest level in nearly 2 decades in July at 24.08% against 22.79% in June, worsening a cost of living crisis in Africa's largest economy as President Bola Tinubu's reforms continue to take effect. Louisa Olaniyi sent us this report from Abuja.
Nigeria's annual inflation rate accelerated to an 18-year high of 25.8% in August, as Africa's largest economy grapples with rising prices ahead of a central bank interest rate decision later in September. In May, President Bola Tinubu removed a popular but costly decades-old petrol subsidy and ended exchange controls. This led to a spike in prices, from food to transport fares, and angering unions who have threatened strikes. The August inflation figure rose for an 8th straight month from July's 24.08%, compounding a cost of living crisis worsened by Tinubu's reforms. Official data shows the last time Nigerians experienced this level of inflation was in August of 2005. Analysts say Naira depreciation, higher fuel and food prices, logistics costs, and money supply growth were some of the major drivers of Nigeria's inflation.
The removal of subsidy helped in exacerbating the situation, whereby increasing the inflation, and also the devaluation, the unification of the exchange rate, which led to the devaluation of the Naira, also help in increasing the current inflation levels. So that's why I said the current administration have a responsibility with respect, because the government is a continuum, so it has a responsibility in respect to where we are currently.
Contrary to analysts' expectations, the central bank raised rates by a smaller than expected 25 basis points in July. It is due to set rates again on September 26th. And some analysts expect a more hawkish stance. As price of staples rise, food inflation, which accounts for the bulk of Nigeria's inflation basket, rose to 29.34% in August from 26.98% in July.
We can't keep blaming the issue of the war, because when you look at Nigerians' inflation, we have not really seen a reduction in inflation. But despite this increase in rates by the central bank. But when you look at the developed countries, there have been a moderation in inflation after persistent increase in it. So that's why we cannot continue to blame the war. We have our local issues to contend with.
The price of diesel has more than doubled at 850 Nigerian Naira a litre, which is about $1.12. Only a year ago, diesel was selling for 400 Naira a litre. Petrol is around 3 times more expensive since the end of May, when the government removed a subsidy on petroleum products. Petrol is between 580 Naira a litre to 630 Naira a litre, up from 195 Naira before the removal of the subsidy. The central bank's decision to float the national currency against the US dollar has also resulted.
Okay, yeah, so that was even a report in August, 2024. But even then, things have gone worse since then. So right now, even the fuel price is about 1,000 and 1,200, depending on the location, per liter of petrol, right? And if you also look at the inflation rates currently, it has grown again, to about 33%, in October. So I'm just trying to like paint a picture, a very bad picture for us, meaning that if inflation rate is growing at 33%, what it means is that your purchasing power is also reducing by 33% on an annual basis. So really, to really understand inflation, all you need to do is to go back to the definition of inflation as we know it, which is what? The rate at which the prices of goods and services in the economy is rising. And when that is happening, rapidly as 33%, as we can see here, what it means is that your purchasing power, meaning that if you have money in the bank and you're not spending it, if you need to now spend it in another 1 year, the value of that money would have reduced by 33% with no fault of yours. So you can see that there is a good reason, to be worried about inflation and to also be interested in some of the strategies you can put in place to ameliorate its impact, on your own personal finances. Okay, well, let's try to summarize the causes, based on the video and some of the things we know about the economy as it is today. So in summary, the inflation we are seeing today in the economy is just caused by what? The high energy prices and fuel subsidy removal. And what we have seen is that as the subsidy removal was done, there was increase in price of, petrol. And because generally, the economy is driven by road transport, it means that all the sector of the economy is also affected, from transport of goods, to people going to work and all of that. So that was the effect of the fuel subsidy removal and the removal also on the electricity tariff. The second one is the Naira devaluation. Again, in February 2024, the Central Bank of Nigeria, they floated the Naira. They allowed the Naira to float. And what does that cause? It causes the Naira to be devalued, to depreciate in value. And, the exchange rate as it is today, because of that policy, is about 1,700 to $1. So what does it make? It makes import to be more expensive. And why should that bother us? Because most of the, production that happens in the country is import dependent. In all the raw materials, the machinery, they are, imported. So most of the items we consume, about 80% of them, they are dependent on import. That also trickle down to consumers. Also, if you look at the money supply, there was massive borrowing, and money printing that happened between 2020 and 2023 under, Muhammadu Buhari regime. So what happened? Debt, the debt profile of the country rose from 27 trillion thereabout to about 89 trillion. So what again is increasing the liquidity in the economy that is not producing anything, and the value of the Naira is also reducing. Even as at today, debt is more than 120 trillion. So the effect of that, printing of Naira without production to back it up is still even affecting the economy today. And if you look at the last one, in order to summarize it, also is the insecurity in the north, which is also affecting most of the food production that happen in that region of the country. So when there's insecurity, farmers cannot go to farm. That also increases, the food prices. And, food prices, again, is a very big component of inflation, which is almost about 150% in the last, 1 year. So I'm just trying to summarize here to say that if you want to understand why we are in a mess as at today, in terms of the general prices of goods and services, you can almost put all of them in these 4 buckets, which is like the fuel subsidy removal and the high energy prices in terms of the energy cost, subsidy that was also done in terms of tariff. If you look at the Naira devaluation based on the policy of, the government to float the Naira, and if you look at the increased money supply that was done because of the massive printing that happened in the regime of, Muhammadu Buhari, and you look at the general insecurity in the north, in fact, not in the north anymore, it's almost everywhere in the country, then you will agree with me that you can almost explain why we have general increases in prices of goods and services as at today. Okay, yeah, so let's talk about big thing, right? How does inflation really affect your personal finance? And I'll probably put them all of that into 5 buckets as well. Because if you don't understand how inflation impacts your own personal finance, it's also very difficult to know what is the strategy you can put in place to ameliorate that problem, to solve that problem. So let's talk about these 5 points, quickly. So the first one is it reduces your purchasing power. That's like a simple, effect of inflation. And you probably would have noticed that the amount of money you carry and that you use in buying groceries last year, that cover like all the basic food items like rice and maize, beans, and all the things you spend money on in terms of, groceries. With the inflation in place, what it means is that the prices of goods and services have increased, and it means that the value of your income can no longer buy what it used to buy. That is a big deal, right? And if you also look at the transport, cost, which is also affecting like the food items, that is also even trying to compound that effect. If you look at the second one, which is savings, inflation is not very friendly to saving. In fact, in the period of inflation, most times you shouldn't save too hard. And I will tell you why. Because why are you saving? You are really saving because you want to keep your money so that by the time you need it in another 3, 4, 5, 6 months or a year, you will have it, and spend it on what you love or what you have been planning to do. Some people save to, buy a car. Some people save probably to build a house. Some people save, to wed, different reasons why people save, right? But in an inflationary environment, what you will observe is that as you are saving and as your time is passing, what happens is that inflation eats that savings, meaning that by the time you now need the savings, inflation would have eaten the value away. Meaning that if inflation is like 20% and your savings, even if you are earning income, interest on your savings, what it means is that you are losing in return on what you can buy without your savings. The third, effect of inflation on your personal finance is what we call the risk of job loss. And this is very big. And the way you can understand this is that when there is inflation in the economy, it affects businesses because the businesses that are also like very import dependent, what happens is that their margins will continue to reduce if they cannot pass it to consumers. Their profits will reduce. At some point, they will be forced to like downsize their operation. And what it means is that you can be part of the people they are going to lay off. So it's one of the effects that you have to look forward to because it happens. It may have happened to other people and you think you're protected. Sometimes nobody is protected. So the effect of job loss is real. And that is something that you should be worried about when you see inflation happening in the economy. The fourth one, which is like the general income inequality, is also a very big deal about inflation. So inflation generally widens the gap between the rich and the poor. And why is that the case? The wealthier people, as you know, they probably, they own assets, that when inflation increases, the value increases. Also, they spend less of their money on food because that is not the big priority for them. So the bigger, effect of inflation affect the low income households. It's because, they usually spend most of their money on essentials. So as inflation rate is increasing in the country, what we see generally is that the impact of that on the low income earner is bigger and the income inequality, continue to expand. That's one of the impacts that we've seen in terms of the inflationary impact. The last one, which is like the reduced access to loans or credit. I know most people don't like loan, but loan is a very good thing if it's cheap, if you have good access to it, because what it means is that you can afford to buy what you probably will buy in future now. But when there is inflation, what happens is that CBN or the central bank is trying to like fight that inflation. And when they're trying to fight it, what they do is that they increase the monetary policy rates, which also affects the bank, in terms of how much loan they can give to individuals or businesses, because they are trying to reduce the money in circulation. What happens is that you will not be able to have like access to the loan or credit that you would love to have. And in fact, sometimes when you have access to that, it's probably more expensive. So generally, it reduces your access to loan or to credit, and that also impacts your standard of living, because really loan is good if it's cheap, because it gives you access to things you probably not have access to if you don't have that, loan. So that is what I'm trying to talk about in terms of impact of inflation on personal finance. And it's a very big deal. You need to be worried about it. You need to look at these 5 factors and to know exactly whether it affects you differently. And we cannot talk about these strategies that I want to propose, which is like the cross of this video. So let's talk about the strategies, which is like the main reason why I'm trying to do this video. So let's start. Generally, when there is inflation in the economy, and let's now zone it down to Nigeria's inflation. These are the 4, things that I'm trying to propose to you that you need to do, you need to put in place as some strategies so that you can at least protect your finances from inflationary effect. So the first one is that when there is inflation in the economy, you need to diversify your investment. And you can see, I did not say diversify your savings. In fact, in an inflationary environment, you need to be very careful to save, because you are saving and the value of that savings is reducing. So when we're saying in an inflationary environment, what you should be doing is that as you are saving, you are pushing that into different investment. And what this is about is that when you're trying to think about this investment, you are thinking about it in terms of different types. And, you can think about it this way. If you look at real estate, they often say that real estate is a very good hedge for inflation. Why? Because generally, when you put your money, your investment in land or in buildings, all of that, is that the higher the price of goods and services, you can always be sure that the value of land or rent will always increase. So we always say that put some of your, investment in real estate, because they tend to hedge, against inflation. Another thing is that you need to think about in terms of investment is that think about stocks as well. When there is an inflation in the country, you need to think about how do I buy the stock, shares of companies. And when you think about shares of the company, you also need to think about which companies should I buy shares in. And that's when you need to think about which companies, deal with consumer staples, meaning that these companies always sell things that consumers need, whether there's inflation or not. Like really, people need to buy food, people need to buy groceries, FMCG companies. Those are the companies you need to think about in terms of buying shares or equity in. The same way with energy companies, energy companies, people always need energy, meaning that if you buy stock of those companies, you can hedge a bit of your savings or your personal finance against inflation. The last one, in terms of diversity, is that think about commodities as well. When you think about commodities, people always talk about gold, silver, these are inflation spikes, right? They retain value during inflation spikes, meaning that if you put some of your investment in commodities, when the value of other people's savings are reducing, you can always rely on the fact that these commodities will always retain their value or have like increased value because they hedge against inflation. So that is a very big strategy that I want to talk about, which is as you see inflation rate in the country, think about diversifying your investment into these 3 investment buckets that I talked about. I mean, it's also good to put your money in bond or in fixed income, but the problem is that if you do not see very high yielding fixed income securities, most times the return may not necessarily edge inflation. In fact, even as attractive as Treasury bill is at the moment, it's about 18% or 20%. If the inflation rate is like 30%, 33%, even if you get some value from treasuries, what I'm trying to say here is that necessarily will not protect your savings or your investment completely from the inflation, meaning that you're getting some yield, but then you are still losing in return. So that is one strategy that you should think about as you see inflationary rates in the country or in any economy at all. Let's talk about the second one. So this is counterintuitive, but I'll explain it to you. So the second strategy I want to put in place here is that you should consider low interest borrowing. And this is a very big deal. So when there is inflation in the country, what you should not do is to be saving your money. Because if you're saving your money and it's not generating enough interest, what happens is that when you need it in the next 6 months or 1 year, what you can buy with it would have gone down drastically. Well, another thing you can do is to borrow to do whatever you need to do at the moment. If you need to buy a car and you need to save to buy that car, why can you not borrow now? Such that if you now need to pay back, the loan, it will probably be at, you are paying, an amount that has like a low value. It's counterintuitive, but it's a very good way to edge against inflation. And the reason why I'm also proposing this strategy also is because there are some very low interest borrowings that you may have access to, like cooperative loans, like some companies that offer like loans. In fact, there are also some banks that you'll be shocked you get some very good interest loan from, because they're trying to attract you to get loan. What you should do is to borrow if you need that money. And if you think about it and say, oh, I'm going to save to buy this thing, but you know that by the time you get to the end of the year, your savings would have reduced in value by 30%. Why can you not borrow now at 20%? Makes sense, right? So that is a very good strategy that you should think about as you're trying to fight the inflation in the country. Let's talk about the third one, which is like, general, is like popular, it's very intuitive, makes sense, is you need to consider dollar indexed investment. And most people tend to think about this really, because what is really happening in the country is the fact that the exchange rate is, depreciating, meaning that if you need to save, even if you are probably going to save or invest, you should make sure that it's indexed in dollar, meaning that if exchange rate is going, bad, by the time you get returns on your dollar investment, it will probably at least edge against the exchange rate problem, even if it doesn't give you like the big returns that you probably would have needed. So I'm just saying that this is also one of the strategies most people think about when they think about inflation edge, especially in Nigeria, that is dollar dependent, especially because most of our imports, they happen in dollars. So that is a very good strategy that you need to consider as you think about fighting inflation, or probably trying to protect yourself against inflation. The last one, which is very good one, is that you need to invest in skills and education. In times of inflation, the issue is that most people that are not having, relatively indispensable skills, they tend to be the easy prey in terms of, job loss, in terms of, displacement. Because when companies are thinking about reducing costs, trying to also stay ahead of the curve, they want to reduce, salaries, they want to fire people, but the people they fire are the people that they really are not caught to their operation. I'm just saying here now that this is the time that you need to think about tech. You need to probably do short course, like crash course in tech, finance, healthcare. What you're trying to do is that you're trying to either protect your job or you're trying to get like a higher role that can give you like higher income that can protect you against reduction in the value of your savings or your income. So that's what we're trying to say here. So think about it: professional certifications, advanced degree, anything that will probably give you an edge in the job market is what you should be thinking about in terms of fighting against inflation. So yeah, so that's about what I'm trying to like share with you today in this video. So yes, I have explained a lot. Again, I showed you a video that kind of give us a background into how did we get here, from moving from like 10% inflation rate, which we are used to 33%. 30% is a very high inflation number. So, and if you don't know the impact, which I've explained, you probably not understand that it's really, really a big deal on your income, on your savings, on your investment. So I'm just saying that with the right strategies in place, you can protect your finances against inflation. So that's about it for today. I'll see you again in my next video. Take care of yourself. Bye.